venture group. Could I have a proposer for that, please? Councillor Rowley, thank you very much. Or Sheriff, thank you very much. And could I have a seconder? I think Councillor Mundy was scratching his head, so but did eventually second. Thank you very much. For variety's sake, thank you very much, Councillor Mundy. Those in favour of Councillor Miles replacing on that panel is nearly unanimous. It is unanimous. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Those substitutions will take effect as of the next meeting of those two panels. That's excellent. That's all for announcements. The minutes. Would anybody like to make any comments on the minutes of the previous meeting? I don't see any there either. Wonderful. In that case, we come to the work plan and the forward plan. There's the scrutiny forward plan is as published in the agenda. There's one alteration to be suggested here, which is that the integrated performance report for Q3 22-23 would ordinarily be considered by finance and performance, but their meeting will be too late for that this year. Therefore, I suggest that should be added to the main scrutiny agenda for March instead. Does anybody have any comments? Are people satisfied with that? People seem happy? Excellent, so let's do that. Wonderful, all right, that's all the stuff at the top of the agenda. So that brings us to our first significant report for tonight. We have Councillor Hollingsworth here in person. We also have Sarah Harrison and Rachel Williams joining us online. Rachel Williams joining in person, thank you very much. And Sarah Harrison joining online. Thank you all very much for your attendance. Councillor Hollingsworth, could I hand over to you to please introduce the item?
Yes, I'll do a brief introduction to where we are at procedurally, and then pass over to Rachel and Sarah for more technical introductions, and then I think we go over to questions at that stage because it's such a large topic. It's kind of difficult to know where scrutiny might wish to proceed in its inquiries. So the background here is that the City Council is in the process of developing its new local plan. The local plan obviously has to include a calculation of housing need, which I emphasise is different to housing requirement. I'm happy to explore that important differentiation should people wish. But the key issue here is that having set our timetable for what's called our Regulation 18 or preferred options consultation in the autumn, we were relying on the Oxfordshire 2050 plan to provide the housing need numbers, not just for our local plan, but for all local plans in Oxfordshire. The failure of that process to proceed, or the abandonment of the Oxfordshire 2050 plan at the behest of councils other than this one is known, and therefore we had to go down a different route in order to identify those numbers. The decision that we took, and which probably scrutiny looked at the time, was that we would go ahead with the Regulation 18 consultation on everything else in the local plan in the autumn as planned, and that is because the capacity of the city for new housing being considerably smaller than any version of housing need, it was likely that our housing requirement, which is the thing you have to have in a local plan, will be a capacity-based figure, and that therefore we could assume that we would be needing that almost irrespective of whatever housing need figure came out of the housing need element of consultation. So we went ahead with that Regulation 18 consultation on everything except housing need. This, what you have in front of you now, is the housing need bit. The basis of it is the document referred to as a HENAR, which we jointly commissioned with Charwell District Council, and is on the website. and I hope, I think after our exchanges at council, that Richard will have sent a link to all members of the committee so that everyone will have spent much of yesterday and today reading the thing from cover to cover. And that, so as I said, that's a jointly commissioned document, and it sets out a housing need based on Oxfordshire, and from that derives Oxford need, which is the figure that we are consulting on. So that's the background. I will now pass to Rachel or Sarah, I don't know, one of the two, to explain more about the technicalities of the process followed.
Thank you. That's a really full summary of where we are in terms of the local plan process. The consultation document that we're seeking Cabinet's approval of next week will test the preferred options for the housing need related parts of the local plan. It relies very heavily on the HENA, the Housing and Economic Needs Assessment that Councillor Hollingsworth has referred to. If it helps, I can give a brief overview of that document itself. That might be a helpful thing to do at this stage. Yeah. The starting point for assessing housing need is the standard methodology which the government sets out. There are you are permitted to look at higher levels of need where there are certain circumstances, and it's long been the City Council's view that those circumstances exist in Oxford due to the economic circumstances, the level of demand, the affordability issues and so on. So working with our partners at Charwell, we commissioned some consultants to have a look at what alternatives there are to the standard method to determine the level of need. As Councillor Hollingsworth touches on, it is based on an assessment of Oxfordshire's need, and there's a reason for that, even though there are only two partners to the process. Oxfordshire operates as a single housing market area and economic area as well. So the view is quite clear, I think, that Oxford doesn't operate in isolation. It's part of the wider Oxfordshire. So it's a more thorough way of testing housing need by looking at the wider Oxfordshire area. Having said that, the HENA is a piece of evidence base solely for the purpose of informing the Oxford City Local Plan and the Charwell District Local Plan. So very, very briefly, the HENA looks at 4 different scenarios, 4 different methodologies by which you could determine a potential level of need for Oxfordshire. So the lower bookend, if I put it that way, is the government standard method that I touched on. The upper bookend is based on the LEPS local investment plan, which is a kind of economic development intervention scenario. So if we were to intervene in the economic market, economic situation, that's a jobs level driven housing scenario. There are 2 scenarios in between those 2 bookends. So one is a demographic based assessment, and that's recognising that the standard methodology is based on some now pretty out of date demographic data. Now we've had the release of the new census, it's possible to see that the basis of the standard methodology is not particularly accurate for Oxford. So the second scenario is based on an up-to-date set of demographic data. And the other intermediate scenario is based on some economic forecasting. So that looks at the trend for the economic sectors that are particularly prevalent in Oxfordshire, and looks at jobs growth, and from there, the level of housing need. So the approach we've taken is deliberately to look at a wider range of different methodologies in order to test what Oxfordshire's housing need is, and therefore what Oxford's housing need is. And we're seeking views on the outputs of that and our preferred option to go with the economic trend based need. Sorry, that was a longer introduction than I anticipated, but it's a complex area.
Thank you very much. Sarah, do you want to add anything at this point, or shall we move on to some questions? I think that was a yes to moving on to some questions. Okay, fantastic. I will start by asking one of my own because it's a very high sort of meta level question, and then I'll take questions from the committee members, and then I have a few more boring ones at the end. So the meta level question is, why are we having this particular argument now? So it seems to me that regardless of what housing need figure is agreed at, as you mentioned, all of the housing need figures within reason, right down to the standard method applied to just Oxford in isolation, would produce a figure which is higher than Oxford's ability to deliver. And therefore, in the local plan, you're going to end up committing to deliver a pretty fixed number of houses, and the need, whatever it is, eventually agreed to be, will be higher than that. And therefore, when it comes to the examination and the examination of the housing need figure, it'll essentially be 100% about how much demand Oxford can justify obliging its neighbours to deliver, and not at all about how much it itself will be obliged to deliver. That being so it's quite a long question. That being so, it surprises me that the venue to have that argument is at our local plan examination and not at the examination of a neighbouring district's local plan, where they would have to justify that they are making a plan which accounts for their neighbour's need. So I'm surprised that this piece of work isn't then presented as a submission to the Vale's local plan examination, or a submission to the South Oxfordshire local plan examination, etc. So to sum up, why now?
The very short answer, and there will be a longer one, so don't think you're getting away that lightly. The short answer is that it's a requirement of the local plan public inquiry to have this piece of evidence. We couldn't go in and say, we assert that our housing need is going to be bigger than our capacity, and therefore, so we need a piece of evidence. And the previous piece of evidence, the OGNA, as it's referred to, is out of date and we need to update it. So there needs to be something. So that's the short answer. The slightly longer answer is that we went through the process you outlined in the last round of local plans, which meant that first West Oxfordshire, I think, and then Vale, and then South Oxfordshire, and then the Cherwell Part 2 inquiry. And we were between the South and the Cherwell Part 2 inquiry, if I remember rightly. Essentially, this argument had to be gone through at all of those local plan hearings before it got to ours. And that doesn't seem to me to be efficient or fair. It's our housing need that is at issue. And it is important, I think, for our neighbours to identify what our housing need is in our local plan hearings. So I think it's a basic sort of principle of fairness. I think it's really important to emphasise this is a piece of work done by ourselves and by Cherwell. We are proposing to use the numbers in it. Cherwell, that is their intention, though they've currently paused while they're talking to their parish councils, not about this number, but about some of the spatial allocations, not for our unmet need, but for their own need in their plan. There's no obligation on any of the other councils to use it. If they've got different evidence which they'd prefer to use, then so be it. But this is evidence that we in Cherwell regard as robust. But in terms of the basic principle of fairness and of logic, and of not having the same argument with the same QCs or cases, sorry, each time, it is better to establish our housing need in our local plan, not in somebody else's.
And just to clarify there, until such time as those authorities wish to make a subsequent plan, whatever figure, supposing that the planning inspector accepts our assertion, that figure won't actually have any effect on what they are or aren't delivering until such time as they come to make a subsequent plan and have to justify what their allocation should be for the forthcoming period. Is that right?
I'm going to let Rachel burrow into the process of how duty to cooperate works.
Yes. So to reiterate, we're we're seeking Cabinet's approval to go out for consultation with this document, and I fully anticipate that our neighbours will use that opportunity to respond to the evidence that we've tabled. We do have ongoing conversations with all of our neighbours because, as Councillor Hollingsworth refers to, there is this thing called the duty to cooperate, which means that neighbouring authorities have to demonstrate that they've tried to work together to resolve cross-boundary issues and so on. So I fully expect to have a more detailed conversation with our neighbouring authorities about the methodology that went into the work, the outputs that it's provided, and the conclusions that the city has come to from it through that consultation process. There is no onus on our neighbours to use the same evidence. I fully expect that they will in time decide what evidence they need for their own local plans. Charwell and the city are on a similar time frame. It's been very helpful that we've been able to work together on this, so that's a positive. Others are on a different time frame, and in due course they will decide what evidence they need to support their own local plans. We will in time have to have some conversations in public and examinations. There will be testing of different sets of evidence, I anticipate, an interrogation of it that way. But we do absolutely need to do the work ourselves to support our own local plan. That's the fundamental answer to this.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just to add, can I just add a sort of little kind of technical terminology element here? As you've identified in the question, there's a difference between the housing need, that's the number of homes needed for the period of the plan, and the housing requirement, which is the number that the local plan has to deliver. And in an area like Oxford, where we don't have sufficient sites, the requirement will be less than the need. The number you get by subtracting the requirement from the need is what's called the unmet need. And for those of you familiar with this process, the unmet need is the housing that, in the case of our current local plan, so the one that's in place now, is met by what's called the unmet need sites, which are the series of sites around Oxford. So Grenoble Road, the site north of Barton Park, the site next to Unipart, the sites between Oxford, Kidlington and Yarnton, for example, Abingdon Airfield, and have I missed one? Saltcross, Ensham. So I think that's all of them. So that's and those sites are ones which would be allocated for that unmet need by our neighbouring authorities. It's not up to us to tell them how to handle that particular situation. I think it is worth reflecting, though, that this local plan that we're talking about now, 2040, adds 4 years onto the end of our current local plans. So that's 4 years worth of additional unmet need, and you can work out from the table 2.1 on page 35 what the maximum figure is there, and it won't be as big as that because we will have some capacity to meet that need ourselves. And several of those unmet need sites have capacity which goes beyond the current local plans. They deliver over such a long period that they actually deliver beyond the end of the current local plans. So there is capacity not yet taken account of in those sites. And, you know, hypothetically, were one to increase density by X%, you could create more capacity, for example, but that would be entirely up to the planning authorities concerned. I mean, we can suggest it, but it'd be up to them to do it.
Thank you very much. I will get out of the way for the time being. Councillor Fry, please.
Thank you. First, I mean, I hope I'm right in saying we're very lucky that Rachel's involved, because you were seconded for a while to something which I believe was knocking heads together at the county level. So at least you know the cast of characters. I have, I think, very basic questions. What is the status within this exercise of the existing local plan, which went for consultation's been approved by inspector? Do we take that as a starting point? Because it answers quite a lot of these questions, I believe. I just don't know, did it use the method that the government seems to want, which is the standard method? It says that should be used in the blurb here, it mentions that, but that was back in 2014. My next question is, have they updated that? Are they rejigging that, or is that set in concrete? Then quickly, oh well, has it been updated? And then last point, the allocation as between the city and Charwell, which you imply you are working together, which is based on employment, is that agreed? I mean, are those ones fixed, or will they be negotiable? There we are.
I'm going to let Rachel answer that last question because I didn't quite follow it. So that seems like a fair way of proceeding. Shall I answer the one on standard method? I'm quite confident on the standard method question. The government created the standard method some years ago. And at various, and it's a formula. I mean, it sounds terribly exciting. All it does is take a couple of numbers and multiply them together, and hope that what comes out makes some degree of sense, which it doesn't. The issue over which projections it uses has been highly politicised, and the government originally used the 2014 household projection. So that was the 2014 extrapolation of the 2011 census forwards. That gave a particular set of numbers. They then updated it with another extrapolation, and they found to their alarm that it suggested that there was much more housing need in, let's be blunt, marginal conservative constituencies in the southeast of England, and that, for inexplicable reasons which were entirely related to planning, I am absolutely sure, led to a sudden move away from that and back to the 2014 figures, with an additional tweak that you could take a bit off the numbers allocated to rural areas. What is it, the 10 biggest cities or the 12 biggest cities, they would take more through some magic process. So it's an entirely political process. I think the critical thing to bear in mind here is that the standard method, which is the minimum, it is not the government's preferred option. It may be the preferred option for lots of councils. It's the minimum, and it's the starting point. Is what it should be. It's not what they insist on. Is using household projection data, which the 2021 census figures show for Oxfordshire are quite wrong. And that is the difference between the two population-based scenarios that you can see in table 2.1. So if you look at the totals rather than the allocations, you'll see that there's quite a big difference between the two. I think the one thing I would say about the formula, it's a fairly simple formula, and it's based on the number of households that form in a particular area. So if your house prices and rental costs are so high, it is very difficult for households to form, then the formula assumes that there is no desire to form households, which in a place like Oxford is palpably nonsense. And that's the flaw, that in high priced areas, even allowing for the formula's inclusion of a factor for demand, you effectively, you kind of just go, well, look, nobody, it's like, pedestrian numbers crossing a busy road. You'd say, well, nobody crosses the road there, therefore there's no need for a pedestrian crossing. And if it's so terrifying that no one ever tries, it's a nonsense. It's the same logic. And that's what the standard method does in a place like Oxford and anywhere which is very high demand, but that demand is suppressed by price.
Thanks. One extra thing on the standard method. Logic says that at some point the government will change the basis of the calculation and move away from the 2014 household projections. They've indicated that they're not intended to do that straight away. The second of our 4 scenarios that we tested was our attempt to try and correct that problem ourselves. What would happen if we used up-to-date census data? So that's what the second scenario is testing. Just on the point on local plans, so we're in a position where all of Oxfordshire's authorities have got an up-to-date local plan, and they run some way into the future. So, for example, in the city, ours goes to 2036 already, and our new local plan will only be adding a further 4 years onto the plan period. It's similar in others, around 6 years. Commonly, it might 6 to 8 years, they will probably add in their next local plans. In terms of the housing numbers, it's important to stress that the base for the report is looking at the period from 2020 to 2040. So we're not building on the end of the housing need established in current local plans. We're reviewing that whole period from 2020 to 2040. So those numbers, by virtue of that fact, already incorporate the identified need that we had last time, and review that and take it forward that extra period of time. So in practice, the local plans of our neighbours and ourselves, we already make allocations for a good number of homes between us. They would be incorporated in this total of numbers because that's from 2020 to 2040 rather than from date to the future. So we need to make sure that that we don't see it as double counted, as it were. We've reviewed the entire period. So in practice, the number of new sites that will need to be allocated is far smaller than that total might suggest.
And my last question is, I mean, you said it's very complicated. No, if you look at the left-hand column of the table, it shows Oxfordshire 100% and then 22.9%, Cherwell 30%. The city, I just wondered, is that agreed at least between the two districts, or is that up for grabs? Because it must be, it sounds as if it's based on a projection, yes? It's not based on current.
Yes, if I take that. So as well as establishing the overall need, the number for Oxfordshire, the HENAR starts to look at how that might be distributed then back to the constituent parts of the authorities. This is the part that we had anticipated the Oxfordshire plan would have dealt with. It would have had a spatial strategy that allocated those numbers between the authorities based on a spatial vision of the future of Oxfordshire. So we don't have that. So we've tested a few different options for how you then might disaggregate the Oxfordshire number between the authorities. In the HENAR itself, it tests, I think, three different ways of doing that. We've concluded that the better way to distribute that overall Oxfordshire need is to look at the distribution of jobs, where the jobs will be, and at the end of the plan period, because that's what we're working to, that's what we're building to. This seemed a logical way of doing it. It does mean that by the end of 2040, we're anticipating that between ourselves and Cherwell, that's more than 50% of the jobs in Oxfordshire. So it means that between us, this sort of distribution of the housing numbers means that Cherwell and Oxford take more of those. That's what that table is showing. Those percentages are the jobs distribution and therefore how we allocated the housing out. This is a proposal. Again, we're testing it at consultation. Cherwell intends to use the same as their proposed way forward. So it's an agreed position between the two of us, but that's to be tested through the consultation.
Yeah. Just to add to that, I mean, I think the principle, I think, is quite an important one, which is, you know, I've talked to my equivalents in the districts, and one of the concerns that expressed there is, you know, the jobs are in Oxford and to a slightly lesser extent in Bicester and Banbury, and the houses are elsewhere. And, you know, I think it's logical then to use this distribution to make sure that the homes in the local plans are most closely reflecting where the jobs are going to be.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Councillor Mundy, your question, please.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I did want to ask a question about that in relation to where how the distribution of housing need was relative to where the jobs were going to be or where they were supposed to be, and also how it was going to be taken into account the connectivity between these places. So, you know, obviously Botley and Kidlington, Bicester, I mean, Bicester, Banbury is still very commutable actually to here, whereas somewhere closer in West Oxfordshire could be a lot less commutable without any train and very few buses.
And I think it's important to emphasise the constraints on, or the limitations of what we're doing with this process. What we're consulting on is the number, before that we consulted on our policies as to where we would put as much as possible of that housing inside the city. The difference between the two, so the unmet need, if any, and it will depend on what the eventual number is and the capacity of the existing sites and so on and so on. It could be 0, it could be a bigger number. That will be up to the other districts. So it will be for Charwell to decide, one, how much they think they can reasonably meet of that unmet need, and two, where it should go. And similarly for West Oxfordshire, similarly for Vale. I mean, certainly, as Rachel said, the 2050 plan, we were looking at a number of spatial scenarios, but before we got to that point, the numbers became an unbridgeable gap between councils, let's say. But there was a clear logic emerging in some of the spatial options that were being tested in having things within easy reach. And I think you can see that in where the current round of unmet needs sites are. They're on the boundaries of the city and they're on public transport routes, and indeed both in most cases.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pegg.
I think that stopped. Yeah, some of my questions have been answered, but there were a few that were on sort of quite specific things. So one was that on page 35, it talks about how there'll be a future assessment of Gypsy, Roma and Traveller, boat dweller and student accommodation housing need for those very specific groups. So I just wondered how that was going to be done. In particular on the student accommodation bit, given that these numbers are based on the census that was done in lockdown, when I assume that student numbers in Oxford were a lot lower than they would be normally. I just wondered how that was going to be accounted for. Second question was, it talks about on page 37 about assessing the condition of existing older person and disabled persons housing. So again, just how is that going to be done? But also this is about the only area where it seems that there's an oversupply in Oxford. So has any thought been put into whether any of that could be switched to other uses, given that basically everything else has an undersupply? And then on the last point was just a quick one. On page 40, it talks about having a stepped trajectory towards meeting the housing need figure. And I just wondered what the advantage of doing that was, because it sort of specifically notes that that's the approach you wanted to take.
Okay, I'm going to leave to Rachel and Sarah the stuff about the particular specialist housing things. The advantage of a step trajectory is that we're tested on whether we meet the numbers in our local plan. There's an annual housing delivery test, the mathematics of which for Oxford appear to be bizarre. Us and Redditch seem to be in some special category of government madness. I don't know what they've done. The chair of Scrutiny is very good at sums, and he might be able to work out what it is that they've done. But if they ever sort it out, we would expect that we would be held to account. This is what we work to. We would be held to account. We're supposed to be delivering at least 90%, I think it is, isn't it? Or 85, I can't remember what the threshold is now, but we're supposed to deliver at least a number each year. Our view is that as we've got a capacity-based target, we need to be aiming at 100% each year. If, say, for example, we were developing Barton Park from scratch and delivering all our need from that, and we knew it would take 5 years to get the site ready and cleared, it would be sensible to have a step trajectory saying 0, 0, 0, 500, 500, 500 or whatever. So that's the advantage. It just enables us to have a realistic measurement against the housing delivery test. The fact that the government have for the last 3 years said we've achieved infinite % of our housing delivery test is I think a mathematical error, and one which we disregard and just try and work towards delivering 100% of our target instead, which we have done, I think, just over.
Sarah will address the other points if that's okay. Thank you.
Sure. On the Gypsy and Traveller study, we're trying to jointly commission that with all of the districts in Oxfordshire. So we will be looking at the whole of Oxfordshire again, but broken down by district, and that will be a joint study which involves a lot of on the ground work that consultants will undertake. The students, we are doing a separate study on that because we really need to look at the need based on intentions of colleges and other institutions and the universities. So that work is underway. It will be separate to the census work. Whether there was an impact on the census data for 2021 from students is always a tricky question in Oxford, and it's something that the demographics of that our consultants looked at when doing the HENA to see what the overall effects might be. But really, when we're trying to work out our need for student accommodation, we need to look separately at that. So it won't be heavily based on the census data. And in terms of the elderly persons accommodation, we will be talking to the county particularly, and also our own housing teams about the condition of some of the accommodation, to see whether there is any which is left over, or if it's just that there is enough but some of it isn't in a good condition and needs to be improved. But I don't think there is much scope really to lose any of that accommodation, because it's not like there's lots unoccupied at the moment. It's just something we're not anticipating an extra need for. But that isn't to say that we won't need to have any policy to improve it, because it might be that there's enough in numbers but not enough that's suitable or the right type. So we'll have to consider whether we've got the right types of accommodation going forward. But that would be through discussions with the providers, really.
Thank you very much. For the record, I'll note that the Chair of Scrutiny is not very good at sums. The Chair of Scrutiny is very good at telling machines to do sums, and is himself barely capable of addition. Any other questions, please, for any of our panelists? I don't see any other questions, in which case you get mine. So, first of all, this one's sort of just really an item of background. So we note that the 2011 to 2021 census delta indicates increase in the Oxford's population of about 10,000. And as noted, that might be an underestimate for reasons of the circumstances of, excuse me, the reasons of the circumstances of the census. I think my mic's just gone away. No, it's back again. Do we have much of an idea why, well, how that's taking place? To what degree is that a case of people living in newly completed dwellings? And to what degree is that actually a case of sort of quiet densification in terms of, for example, houses turning into HMOs, which result in more people being accommodated in the same space, typically, houses being split, that sort of thing?
I think at the moment we're still at the speculation stage, because I don't think we have enough data at the kind of micro level through for that. So I mean, we've had this big sweep demographics, which have been very interesting, but I think we haven't yet had that that level of detail through. We could speculate that it is, as you say, quiet densification. You know, the previous family occupied property now is an HMO, you know, with more individuals in it. Certainly the prevalence of, I think, two phenomena would point to that. One is the number of properties which are probably counting as empty in the census because they're Airbnb, sorry, they're in short-term let, of which Airbnb is but one. I'm very conscious of their lawyers and the speed with which they get in touch. Half an hour, I think it was once, when I said Airbnb by mistake on a BBC interview. So short-term lets, we know that's a rising number in some parts of the city. So my ward, I think it will be in St Mary's, St Clement's, Hinksey Park, you'll see significant numbers there. So you've got that. And the other phenomenon I would think you observe is multi-generational households seem to me to be more and more common, of, you know, 2, 3, even 4 sometimes generations living in a single house, when you wouldn't have seen that in anything like as big a numbers 20 years ago, for example. So I think you might be right, but I don't think we have the data yet to be absolutely sure.
And if that phenomenon does in fact turn out to exist, is that a thing that we make any attempt to take into account in terms of the city's ability to house additional people through densification?
Well, I think it plays both ways. I mean, theoretically, you could, and a bit of planning history here. This came up in the debates over Cambridge's future in 1950 when they tried to constrain the size of the town, and somebody said, well, one of the possible issues here is we might end up with some overcrowding, and 10 years later that's exactly what they had, massive overcrowding. So I think it plays into my critique of the standard method. This is exactly what the standard method is not picking up. It's suppressed household formation. A lot of those people, whether it's in multi-generational households or couples who are in an HMO, would like to be in a household of their own, and they can't. And that's what the standard method doesn't properly account for. And that's why I think it's a flawed measure.
Thank you. On a different topic, do any of our projections here explicitly account for oxpens? Now, I'm not asking that just to be difficult. I'm asking that because it's noteworthy, I think, that the HENA reports on the current square meterage of office space available within Oxford, and Oxpen's expected 100,000 square meters is a really substantial fraction. I think just over 25% of what Oxford currently has available, which would suggest that development would be a real sort of bowling ball in a bathtub in terms of sort of impact it might have on prices and supply and demand of office space, and might have a really significant effect on employment-driven need. Is that explicitly accounted for at all in any of our projections of future employment?
So the example you give of Oxpens, of course, is an allocated site in the current local plan, so it's a known proposition. Lots of the work that went into the HENA was an assessment of the market, the current market. The consultants spoke to agents and some of the bigger landowners, and looked at what the likely trend is, the forecast trend. They picked up, for example, and of course they picked up that there's the trend for R&D, for example, in the city. So that's fully accounted for. I'm confident that the work they've done to assess that future forecast demand will have picked up cases like that. They looked at specific sectors, the sectors that are particularly prevalent in Oxford, for example. And there will be an additional piece of work that we do for the local plan that looks at our employment land needs. So that's another piece of work where a set of consultants are talking to all of the big landowners, the big developers, the agents, some of the big institutions about what their future requirements might be, and that will feed into that piece of work and that loop back through to the HENA. So yes, in short, sorry.
So the HENA, sorry, please.
Well, I was going to make a broader point, which I think you've heard me make before, but others may not have done. So I'll throw it in and see whether it lands. If you look at the HENA and what's called the CE baseline, which stands for Cambridge Econometrics, people did the work. Essentially, that is the assumption of what will happen to Oxfordshire's economy through to 2040, not as a result of interventions which are happening immediately now, whether it's the Oxwed development or whatever it might be, but it's happening as a consequence of decisions made decades ago, and I'll throw a few in. So in Oxford, for example, the decision to have a business park on the site of a large chunk of the former car factory came in the late 1980s as a result of the loss of 25,000 or more jobs at that car factory. When it shrunk from 30,000 at its height to 4,000 in the late 80s, early 90s. So it was a deliberate decision, and obviously employment on that site flows as a consequence from there. The science park on the edge of Oxford dates from the same era and for the same sort of line of thought. this is for Oxfordshire. So if you go to the decision made by it was to convert former MOD railway sidings at Milton Park into a business park, which now employs a very substantial number of people. That was taken in the late 1960s, the early 1970s. The decision to put Harwell and the science things around it probably goes back to the 40s and 50s. So, and similarly decisions around employment in Bicester and Banbury to the 80s. The reason I say this is that a district councillor, who I think probably ought to know better, said in a public forum not that long ago that there was no growth until the growth deal, which is to sort of invert common sense on its head, as well as to ignore the history of what's happened to Oxfordshire's economy. The growth deal, the 6 councils, including the county councils, an attempt to get money from government for infrastructure and affordable housing to meet the needs and the pressures created by the growth that was happening and is going to continue to happen. And I'm a big fan of the wisdom of King Knut on this, and the notion that you can turn on and off Oxfordshire's economy like a tap is entirely wrong. You can steer it and you can nudge it, absolutely, but the notion that you could generate economic growth of this scale by signing up to a growth deal for a frankly tiny amount of money in comparison, or that we could turn it off, is nonsensical. And if, for example, we didn't go ahead, we cancelled Oxford and all the positive benefits that would come from that, then those jobs would be somewhere else, somewhere in the vicinity of Oxford. They'd be on the science park, or they'd be on the business park, they'd be Oxford North, they'd be in Bicester, they'd be at Harwell, they'd be at Milton Park, because people want to have their firms here, building off the science knowledge base that stems from Oxford University. So if we want to blame somebody, we blame the people who created Oxford University in 12, whenever it was, Mike will know. And more importantly, I guess, the ones who decided that we should do science at Oxford University rather more recently.
So, not to interrupt the lecture, but the surprising bit here for me is that a lot of what you're describing there seems to be the process of organic growth that has been observed, in fact, over the past decade. And in CE's past actual data, you can see a remarkably linear trend for all 5 of Oxfordshire's districts. Not sure which one I just excluded. And then that is projected into the future in a pretty linear way. Because of the large scale of this particular intervention, I would expect to see like a really quite remarkable stair step in there somewhere, because of the fact that you're introducing, not actually absolutely abruptly, presumably Oxpens will be completed to some degree in stages. It won't all come on stream, instantaneously, but nonetheless, we might expect to see over the course of perhaps 3-4 years, this really quite large amount of new space become available, and really quite large amounts of, relatively speaking, new employment come in that time. And then for that projection, for that linear projection to remain valid, you would need there then to be a period in which employment is relatively flat after that, which would sort of imply that there's essentially a shockwave going through the market, and that there's a period during which demand is very sated and people are struggling to move their office space. Conversely to it, continuing to rise in the sort of usual manner. So it's surprising that you're not expecting a marked event relating to that particular large intervention relative to what we've seen over the past decade.
There wasn't really a question, was it? It was more of an opinion, but just throwing a thought into that. I mean, Cambridge econometrics, you'll need to burrow into their model. But we know from our last local plan and our economic needs assessment, there is also considerable suppressed demand in Oxford for small and startup business space. So we know there are lots of people who would, if they could afford it, that's why we've included an affordable employment space policy in our preferred options, would occupy commercial employment generating space if they could. So I think that there's an element of that. So I'm not sure there would be quite the sort of sated, that's the word, period of satiation. The period where there's nobody needing new employment space in quite the way you describe. And I always think, bear in mind, this is also an Oxfordshire-wide economic assessment. So it's fairly big, yes, in an Oxford context. It's not that big in an Oxfordshire context. It may be that there is such a blip on the line. It's just that it's drawn at such a scale we can't see it.
Okay, moving on, I think. And also I realised I did two terrible realisations there. One, that I knew the word you were looking for, which I think is satiety. And then secondly, that I didn't know how to pronounce it because I've only ever seen it written down. So I would look very briefly smug and then like an idiot. So you got both of those. Moving on, my last topic, I promise, and then I'll let you go and stop Councillor Brown waiting. If anybody does know how to pronounce that, by the way, please do let me know. Commuters, inflowing commuters. So in the course of both of the employment-led models, you've got the influence of growth in just economic growth trends and the employment growth that's expected to be has been a consequence of that and is expected to be projected into the future. And then you've got the existing labour shortage in terms of the number of in-commuters, which is, and the target is to reduce that to the 2011 level, which, if I recall, that's a 14,000 a 14,000 deficit that is trying to be covered there in terms of reducing in-commuting that has been rising since 2011. Am I okay on the background so far? Okay, great. So the question then is, these are commuters into the county, right? These are commuters into Oxfordshire, not commuters between districts within Oxfordshire. So then the thing that surprises me is that you take the organic growth, you add on the desire to make up for existing shortage, to get a total amount of additional labour that you're hoping to accommodate, and then you distribute that within the county. The surprising bit is the commuters, because the commuters surely are considerably more likely to be targeting non-Oxford locations just because of its location within the county. So what I'm thinking there is, it is conceivable to commute into the county and into Oxford from the east, but it's not that conceivable to do that from the northwest or south, because you are a really very long way away from Oxford in those directions. Do you see what I mean? So this is why it's surprising to me that the commuters get thrown into the bucket and then distributed rather than being treated as their own entity, you know, of the organic stuff getting distributed and then saying, but what about commuters? Where do those commuters want to go? Because if it's the case that those commuters mostly wish to go to Banbury, or those commuters mostly wish to go to Witney, or something, you know, a place that is closer to the border of Oxfordshire, where you'd expect an in-commuter to be more likely to target, then I would expect that particular desire, and unsated desire, it appears, to be focused in those areas towards the borders of the county.
Sarah will take this point on the commuting, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's less a target and more that when the consultants calculated or forecast the amount of jobs there's likely to be in 2040, they, when turning that into the household needed to make an assumption about how many people would be commuting in, because people do commute into Oxfordshire and they will continue to commute into Oxfordshire. The alternative would be to forecast the number of jobs there's going to be and then to say, have that many houses for that number of jobs in Oxfordshire, but that wouldn't be a realistic assumption just because of the way people work now. We know that there will be people commuting in who want to have a job in Oxfordshire, but not necessarily to move here, and maybe they work remotely anyway, so it's not necessarily about commuting, it's just about people who live outside of Oxfordshire but who have a job which is based in Oxfordshire. So there were various things behind making the assumption on how many commuters there would be, and obviously it is always going to be an assumption, but there had to be one built into the model, and they used the 2011 9,000 figure. So hopefully that helps explain it, but it is a bit confusing. So
I'm certainly not arguing that the number of commuters we'd want it to hit zero. only that we would, generally speaking, expect the commuters to be disproportionately distributed around the outside of the county, which is why it's surprising to see them added prior to the distribution of that number across the county.
Can I throw a thought in, or two thoughts in there? Thought number one is that it depends on their mode. Obviously, if they're walking, then yes, clearly the edge of the county, cycling and possibly car. If they're travelling by train, for example, from let's say Reading, where a substantial number of commuters come from, into Oxford, it could be Didcot, but it could be Oxford. If they're coming from Hadnam Parkway, again, and of course we've got East West Rail, which will bring some commuters, we think, probably from Milton Keynes and things to Oxford or to Bicester. So I think it rather depends on the mode assumptions. Yes, clearly, given where Banbury is, quite a lot of people travel 4 or 5 miles to a job in Banbury, and they'll be coming from Northamptonshire or Warwickshire because that's the nature of where Banbury is in the geography of the county. But we've also got lots of people coming here. The other issue is that some of the biggest commutes are to the employers we know are here. I use the hospital trust as an example. You can do a little map of where, and they have done, of where their staff come from, and that includes people coming from the far side of Birmingham, and as much as Stoke for working shifts. So we know that we've already got a very disproportionate number because of the nature of the jobs that are very particular. Similarly, the 2 universities are in Oxford, not in Didcot and Banbury, for example. So it depends on the nature of the job. So I think those things would balance each other out. Your proximity argument works probably for some sorts of jobs. My nature of jobs and nature of mode probably cancels each other out as best as we know.
All right, I will yield at this point. Are there any other questions anybody would like to ask before we...
I just wanted to draw attention to one table because I think it's quite important in this, and that's table 2.2 on page 36. It's there for illustrative purposes. It's a kind of sense test, and it's the affordable housing need figure. And you will see in it, table 2.2, shows that we think the affordable housing need per annum across Oxford alone is 740 units. And while, for reasons which are explained, that will not be the basis on which we put forward a housing needs scenario, it is something I think we should check, whatever scenario it is that we do put forward, so that were we to be putting forward a scenario, for example, which said we only need 500 housing units full stop per year, that would be 240 short of just the affordable housing need, let alone everything else. And I think it's a helpful sense test to have in thinking about the different scenarios, and I'm sure it's a comparison that I and others will be making between whatever scenarios are put forward as part of the consultation process.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to ask at this point? Otherwise, I will thank Councillor Hollingsworth and Rachel and Sarah both for their attendance, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more fun discussions on the housing need question at various fora over the coming months. So we all have that to look forward to. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move along to item number 7 on the agenda, which is the covered market site visit. Richard has submitted the report. Since we are on the same topic, the covered market, would anybody like to ask any questions or make any comments that relate to the site visit in particular? So okay. Oh yes, sorry. And we have Emma Govins. Sorry. Yes. We have Emma Govins present, as well as Ted Maxwell joining us online, and we have Councillor Brown in person. Thank you all very much for attending. Are there any questions that relate to the covered market site visit? Doesn't look like it, so we can move straight on to the main report. Now, so the important question about who can be present in the room is, does anybody wish to raise anything that relates to either appendix number 3, which is the detailed financials of the covered, relating to the covered market master plan, or to Appendix 6, which is the risk register. Does anybody want to raise any questions that relate to either of those things? Because if so, we will need to exclude members of the public prior to doing so. Okay, I don't see anybody saying so. Please do take great care, I speak from experience, not to stumble into doing so in the course of asking whatever questions. In that case, I'll hand over to Councillor Brown, please, to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you also for taking the trouble to do a site visit to the covered market. I hope it's wasn't people's first trip, and I'm sure it wasn't. I mean, I think the need for further investment is evident, not least around the entrances to the market, and indeed the toilets, which I think have long, in spite of some investment over the years, still remain still less than desirable, I'd say, and also an unfortunate first introduction to the covered market, which, as the report notes, is one of the jewels in the crown of Oxford City Centre, and we want to continue its place as a jewel in that crown, and preserve it and indeed enhance it for the future. And that's basically what this report is about. So, I mean, I think it's a really exciting report. It's a really exciting master plan. I'd like to particularly thank Ted and all those others who have had a huge input into making this master plan a reality, and who will then be taking it forward to deliver it, which I think is really important to do. But I think it is exciting, and I think it is about having a real vision for the future of the market. There's been a lot of engagement, there's been a lot of consultation with traders, with other city centre stakeholders, with the community, and with councillors. And I think lots of people have given their ideas over quite a lengthy period. And that is where this master plan comes from. And so I think it is not just a significant investment, but a significant investment which is based on listening to people and having a really good vision for the future of the market. So I'm hoping everyone has had a chance to read the report and indeed the documents that are attached to it. The detail of much of it would much better be put to Ted and to Emma. So I'm not going to sort of go into all of the details of the report, but I'm very happy to answer any questions, Chris, but you might want to ask Emma and Ted if they want to answer anything, make any remarks.
Certainly. Would you like to add anything at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Susan. I just, as the from the perspective of the project manager who's kind of guided it up to this point, just to build on what Susan said, it has been it's been a real privilege, and it's been even just to get to, in many senses, as you said, Susan, the kind of the what may, subject to a cabinet decision, be a starting point for delivery. Even getting to that starting point has been, more than 2 years worth of work from people inside the council, consultants, and the very long list of stakeholders as well as the public. So it's been I'm as close to all the details as anyone can be. So hopefully between Emma and myself, we can answer any questions you have. But it's been a ride. So looking forward to hearing what you think about it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for the introduction. Who has questions about the covered market? Lord Mayor, please.
Thank you very much. If you look, I doubt any of you have seen it. One of the recommendations of the budget review group is recommendation 4. And I looked at the date of this report, which I think was only completed last month. Well, we're now February, but it was completed, I think, in December. But the recommendation is that the council updates the estimates during the period of the medium-term financial plan of the income and expenditure, including capital on the covered market, to take account, this is the point, of the slippage in the plans to fill the empty units and in the plans to start evening openings with music to promote footfall. I suppose my concern is that, this is a hefty capital budget. I honestly, maybe Susan, whether this is factored into the latest budget, but these are pretty big sums. And I just wondered, are they there? And I feel that the experience so far, we were promised evening openings and so on last year, never happened. Instead of, if you read the report, somewhere it talks about expecting to have all empty units occupied by, I think it was October last year. They're definitely not occupied. I mean, it's rather sad at the moment, and we've just lost 1 or 2 more traders. I just wonder what confidence I can have that this plan will succeed, because I'd love it to succeed. And I wonder whether in particular we're considering having professional market managers rather than do it within the council, because, you know, things have slipped, as this recommendation 4 implies.
Well, firstly, I think that the questions that you are asking are not really related to this report, because it's about the master plan, it's not about the letting strategy. So I'm afraid I think your questions were probably better put when going around the market. I mean, I can't answer for certain whether the issues that you've raised around the budget have been taken into account. And again, I think that's probably a question better raised as part of the budget process, and you know, I will undertake to go away and find out in response to that. I mean, I frankly think that's a bit of an insult to the market manager, Elaine, who does a great job. You know, there are some real challenges with all retail at the moment, and in particular there have been challenges not of her making in relation to licensing, which I think has been one of the issues, and indeed just some of the negotiations with traders in the market and making sure that everyone's happy. I think that is about good market management. So yes, I think there have been some delays that we would rather there hadn't been. But I'm confident that the kind of changes that this report is recommending will make it easier to manage the market in future, and will make it a better and more attractive market for traders and for visitors to the market, which of course will then in turn make it more attractive to traders. So, I mean, this is not just an investment plan to make the market look prettier. But this is obviously a financial investment with an expectation of a financial return. So that is an important part of the whole package.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Jarvis, please.
Yeah, thank you for the report. I've got 2 questions which are hopefully quite straightforward. The first one, it may be that I've missed this in the papers, but obviously there's the numbers in the report of past historic footfall, running I think from 2019 to recently. I guess the question really is sort of in terms of the projected increase in footfall that the master plan will provide. Do we have a kind of a set of projections and numbers attached to that in terms of what we're expecting it to deliver in terms of each increased footfall? And the second question is very specific. So it's about toilets, and there's a line in the papers which says that the changes to the toilets will ensure that they're accessible to people of all genders. I just wanted to check what was meant by that in practice. Will there be bespoke gender neutral facilities as part of the redevelopment of the toilets?
Susan, would you like me to answer both of those questions?
I very much would, Ted. Yes, thank you very much.
That's all right. So in terms of footfall, that is a good question. I think there isn't a fixed footfall increase that is kind of baked into the plan. But if you've picked up, I think the key documents we're looking at is Appendix 2, the outline business case, and in there you'll see that it's kind of section 2.5, the case for change, that the commercial agents GCW, their kind of their final advice settled on, if we make 3 significant changes to the covered market, that will have a significant enough impact on footfall and dwell time that it will unlock more reliable confidence in a positive trend in rental income. So it's not a precise peg in terms of footfall numbers, but it is a a kind of sufficient confidence in a kind of sea change that can unlock both increased footfall and dwell time, and by extension, kind of the overall vitality of the market. So yeah, there is, yeah, you haven't found a specific number because there isn't a specific number it's pegged against. And in terms of the question about toilets, at this stage, it's at kind of concept design. So if you, if I try and find the exact page, but if you see in Appendix 1 any drawings about the proposed layout of the market, including where there are toilets. So for example, so I'm just flicking through, for example, page 13 of Appendix 1, you're not seeing a detailed design of toilets, you're seeing an indicative layout, which would need to be worked through at the next stage. So yeah, I think that the question you asked and kind of resolving that, and what's the exact configuration, how is the approach to gender dealt with, how is the approach to different abilities, more kind of facilities for changing, whether they're the children or the babies, that kind of detail will be picked up at the next stage. But what we're resolving at this stage is the best location, or the recommended best location for the slight relocation of the toilets, rather than the exact detail of what goes where within the facilities.
Would that be a reasonable thing to turn into a recommendation? Do you think that that specifically how that facilities welcome to all genders translates into the provision of a neuter facility of some form, how that ought to be realised should be carried forwards into the next stages of this work? Is that acceptable to people?
I mean, I just think that's what Ted says, and that's what the report says. But it's up to you to make whatever recommendation that you.
Sorry, I took Ted to be meaning that that this wasn't tied down yet. Is that accurate, or do you think it is already tightly specified?
No, it's definitely not tied down, and I just think there will be very many constraints and kind of requests, kind of which will feed into the next stage of work, whether it's for the toilets or for any other bit of the project. So you're very welcome to make the recommendation that you like, and it will subject to any cabinet decision. It will have to be taken into the round alongside potentially quite a long list of other constraints and requests.
Understood. Thank you. All right. Further questions, please. Sorry, yeah, Councillor Ashok.
Forgive me if this is the wrong place to ask, but is this we can still talk about the Florence Park? No, that's really...
Okay, Councillor Mundy, please. Briefly forgot your name. That's not great.
Thank you. So I went to the site visit, and that was very interesting and enjoyable. We did ask about the vacant units. And we were told at that time that there were 2 true void units that effectively could be considered to be not having a current potential of being rented out to a trader. I just wondered, now that was obviously back in late summer, so where are we at now? Are we still at 2 true void, or are we at a different figure at this point? That's first question. Do traders report any issues with accessing the loading bays on Market Street? And if so, has there been an enforcement to ensure that it's not being used by other people with vehicles? We've obviously recently heard that Fellas is going to vacate on the 31st of March, so we just wonder whether that is, whether we're looking at that unit being taken by an equivalent trader. And that's it for now. Thank you.
I see a hand from Emma, if you're happy. Please go ahead.
I'm happy to take the void units question, unless Susan, you wanted to speak first.
You go ahead, and I'll maybe chip in afterwards.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so when we walked around the market, there were two true voids at that time. There still remains 2 true voids, but they are now different units. So for example, when we were walking around the market, we had it was the Oxford Soap Company. They were looking to expand their offering and they were taking another unit. They've decided to consolidate that into their existing unit now. So they did try it up until Christmas and it didn't work for them in terms of staffing, having the 2 units. So they're now looking at possibly taking one bigger unit to have both offerings. So, and then the other unit that we did have at the time does still remain vacant. So we have, although we have a number of units that possibly look like they aren't trading, they are either under offer, they're in planning, or potentially they're still, the lease is still actually with the trader. And it's not within our control to be able to do anything with it. So we're working with traders that are in that position to try and make sure that we get those frontages activated as quickly as possible. In terms of the loading bay question as well, we have had, we do get comments from traders on the use of the loading bays on Market Street. They aren't actually within our control, they sit within county. So we work with county quite regularly. So Elaine works really closely with county to try and alleviate the pressure on those loading bays. So there are restrictions at the moment as to how long traders can use them for. But Ted, I don't know if you want to maybe expand on the kind of future plans for loading.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Yeah, no, I think it's a good point to flag about the use or misuse of loading bays on Market Street, because the master plan, at least the Market Street element of the master plan, the success of it will, at least in the early days, be helped significantly by really good enforcement of the actual regulations by the county council. So that's kind of written into Appendix 1, and we've been very kind of open in our preliminary conversations with the county council about that we successfully transforming Market Street to the benefit of covered market traders, covered market customers, the wider city centre. It will rely on some fun visible changes, but it'll also rely on some not so fun less visible changes, such as improved enforcement. So we're very mindful that if it's already an issue, if we are constraining the amount of loading space on Market Street, it becomes an even bigger priority to get to have enforcement done properly. So we're kind of eyes wide open on that, but it's definitely something that we'll need to work even better with the county council on in future.
Thank you both. Can I come to Councillor Archer, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry,
I think
please.
there was a final question there which wasn't addressed, which was the one about fellas and new butchers. And just to sort of reassure you, Edward, we are looking, if we can, to replace a sort of like for like offer there. But I mean, I won't underestimate the difficulty. Shopping habits are changing, and it is a challenge. So that is what we will seek to do in line with our council, the covered market letting strategy. But we'll have to see where that takes us. So yeah.
Sorry, you can see why whenever I'm asked 3 questions, I always forget the last one completely. So apologies for doing so.
Normally me.
Councillor Archer, please go ahead.
Thank you. That follows on really nicely, actually, because my question was going to be exactly that if in the letting strategy, the like for like, since our last tour when we went round, I wanted to know how many businesses or companies did we look at that we may have turned down? Has there been companies that we've turned down because we're looking for the like of like strategy?
Emma, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, happy to take that one. So we do look at quite a number of criteria when we're evaluating offers, but just to kind of add a little bit of context to the process that we go through. So when we have a unit that is available to let, we take it out to the market and we market it openly for users that may be interested in coming into the covered market. We make everyone aware of our leasing strategy so that they can understand whether or not their business is likely to be evaluated favourably in line with that leasing strategy, so that when they submit their bids, they know, they have a good idea as to whether or not it would be an acceptable use. where what we wouldn't want to do is say that we will own, if we use the Fellas example, we wouldn't want to say that we will only put a butcher's in that Fellas unit, because we might not get that type of inquiry for that unit, or we might actually get that type of inquiry that are interested in an alternative unit, because just because it worked for Fellas doesn't mean it necessarily works for all of that type of use and the layout and things. So we try to be quite flexible with how we use the units, and we try, and although we don't zone the market in terms of uses, we try to be quite sensible in terms of layout, making sure that the fresh produce are close to one another and things, so that there is a kind of sensible order around that. So there's quite a few different things that we take into account when considering any offer on the units. So the Fellas one will be put on the market, and it will be advertised just to anyone who is interested in coming in the market. If we do get another butcher's that has a viable business plan, then obviously that would be brilliant. But I don't think there's a strong opportunity, the chances of us getting that through I think are quite slim. So we need to be quite open-minded about it and do some soft market testing generally on the market with other butchers' potential inquiries to see which units might work best for them and whether they would be interested in coming into the market.
Thank you. Can I take Councillor Rowley's question, please?
Thanks. I note this is actually in the paper detailing the site visits to the covered market, that take up of the two free-to-use electric delivery vehicles hasn't been as much as was hoped for. Is that because we overestimated the need of the market traders for delivery facilities? Is it because there's been a shift in delivery mode to things like pedal and post, which is mentioned, or is it for some other reason?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I don't know if you can, Emma.
I will give it my best. So I think some of the feedback that we've had from the traders has been it has been a really well received initiative, the principle of it. So one of the things that they have maybe struggled with is staffing to actually undertake these deliveries. So what we have found is that since Pedal and Post have taken over the use of one of the bikes, it is being utilised much more frequently by the covered market now that they don't actually have to staff it for deliveries themselves. So I think it was a really good lesson for us to learn, and for the covered market traders. They did originally think that they would be keen to use it themselves. And it's just about listening to the feedback, I think, from the actual users to make sure that we can make it successful. But it definitely does, it has a much higher usage now that we're working with Pedal and Post.
Fantastic, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions to bring? I don't see any, right. In which case, that is it for the evening. Unless anybody wants to advance anything that's been mentioned into a formal recommendation. Yeah, Councillor Asher, please go ahead.
It's not a formal recommendation, just a comment.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, like when we have Easter, or we have like different seasons, would it cost extra to do like kids activities or drawing different types of people to come into the covered market? I was just thinking that might be a good idea.
I mean, it's certainly very much part of the strategy around the market is to have more events in the market. And I mean, I think there are already quite a lot of things which do try and draw people in at different times of the year. But any additional suggestions that you had, Lubna, would be very welcome, and I'm sure we could look at them. Emma may have more to add.
Yeah, I was just going to add that on top of everything that that you've just mentioned there, we also will have a new events programme with TAP Social when they take proper occupation of the unit. So they've now successfully received their planning and licensing. So we're looking at the implementation of the late opening now, which is brilliant news for the market. and they will not only be looking at evening activities, but they also want to have activities during the day as well to help attract families. So there will be additional support for events, seasonal events and things. They're already talking to our team at the council, and they've got some brilliant ideas. They want to involve lots of other traders and things. But if, as Susan said, if anyone has anything specific, that would be great, and we can have a look at whether we can implement it.
Thanks very much. Councillor Mundy.
Yeah, so I just had something specific, actually. So I think it was brought up during the site visit, the idea that we may be encouraging people who weren't necessarily, kind of professional traders or who had a history of being professional traders, opening up shops, or also pop-up shops as well, which could obviously be increased revenue from the covered market and encourage more enthusiastic participation from broader people in the community, really.
I mean, that's very much part of the strategy and thinking of having the smaller units. So, one of the things that we have done is taken some of the bigger units, made them smaller, although, as you just heard from Emma, we have got the opposite request now for someone who's got two relatively smaller units, wants a bigger unit. So these things, I think, are never quite set in stone, but there is a quite good tradition, I think, of people moving from different sort of types of unit. We've had people who've moved from Gloucester Green Market into the covered market, and then again people who've moved from the covered market into other premises in Oxford. So I think it is very much something that we do see as a sort of part of our economic development and support for small independent businesses across the city. I think it is an ideal space. City centre, some really small units. You don't have to pay business rates because they're so small. And so it is very helpful for start-up businesses, and many have passed through that way, and some of them are still there, and some of them have moved on.
Wonderful. I see hands from both Emma and Ted. Are they legacies, or are you wanting to come in?
It was just a very quick one, just on the kind of short term. We've had quite a number of successes recently in the covered market. So we've been working quite closely with Makespace to try and bring in independent traders who normally wouldn't be able to access, a traditional shop in the normal way. And we have actually found that 2 of the traders who came in on a short term for Christmas 21 are actually still in the market and have upsized. And we have a really successful trader in the Central Square as well, who has come to us through Makespace, and they originally came on a short-term pop-up. So the market is really perfect for that type of user. It's just making sure that we have the right units to put them in.
So, and then I was just going to build on, I think it's all the same theme. I was just going to build on it and bring it back to the master plan, which is that the master plan proposals are seeking to improve this trend, build on the successful trend of the covered market being a place for people to graduate to. Because what we'll get if we deliver something like these master plan proposals is 2 new pop-up areas for the most kind of startup style traders to go to. So Market Street itself would lend itself to a weekly, monthly, some kind of a rhythm of outdoor pop-up market. And equally the new communal space that we're looking to create on the northern edge, again, rhythm to be determined, could be weekly, monthly, seasonal, but again, that the seating could be taken out the way, and rather than a cultural event, you could have a pop-up market in the market. So this kind of almost like a ladder that Susan was describing from Gloucester Green to the covered market to High Street, it can have other steps in it if and when this master plan happens, which includes Market Street, which includes the communal square inside the covered market itself. So I think that it'll give the council and the market managers, market operators, even more flexibility about putting the right kind of traders into the right kind of space.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much indeed. Unless there's any further, then Councillor Jarvis.
Sorry, I lost track a little bit whether we'd already agreed to a recommendation around the gender neutral provision for toilets, or whether that slipped. If we haven't, then I would like to push for it.
That was my understanding. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Excellent. Right, okay, let's take another run up at these closing remarks. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Brown. Thank you very much, Ted. Thank you very much, Emma, all of you for giving us your time this evening. We'll now move along to the next item. I should have mentioned, by the way, on the topic of recommendations of the previous item, I don't think there were any formal recommendations to bring forwards, but plenty that will go into consultation responses and things like that. So yes, thank you all three very much indeed.
Thank you, good night.
The next item on the agenda is going to be the budget report, the report from Budget Scrutiny. Now, this is the one which definitely is confidential, I'm afraid. So I will check with the scrutiny officer in a moment for the formal form of words, but thank you very much indeed, members of the public, for attending. Sorry that you have to be excluded from this part. When it comes to the previous item about the local plan, it's worth noting there will be a consultation on that starting in mid-February. So if you yourselves would like to submit remarks to that consultation, that will be open for public submissions starting mid-February. Thank you very much indeed for coming down and for giving us your attention. I'll now check if I need to say some formal words. One second. All right, I have my if I could have the committee's attention. All right, I have to make my formal incantation now. If the committee wishes to exclude the press and the public from the meeting during consideration of any aspects of the preceding or following agenda item, it will be necessary for the committee to pass a resolution in accordance with the provisions of section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, specifying that the grounds on which their presence could involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as described in specific paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, if and so long as in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Is the committee happy